All right, so wanted to welcome everyone to our first session after lunch. We've got 50 minutes here, and I'll introduce, we've got Eric Gibbs and Phil Ice, who will be presenting to us on originality, ghostwriting, and the ethics of authenticity.
Very good. Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. So I'll do just, let's just do quick introductions, Phil, and we'll get that out of the way just on our background, and then we'll jump right in. So my name is Eric Gibbs, President of North America for Erkand. Been in the ed tech sector now almost 22 years. Everything from kind of startup, wireframes, building out products, primarily on the sales and business development side. So everything from Applia to adaptive learning with Acrobatic, and most recently from 2009 to 2015, managed the business development for Turnitin. So very familiar with the plagiarism prevention space. My colleague, Phil Ice, is from Analyticus, and he's the Chief Solutions Officer. And Erkand is currently establishing a partnership and a collaboration with Analyticus with their authorship authenticity tool. So I'll flip it over to you, Phil, just for a quick intro.
Hi, Eric. Thanks. As Eric said, I'm the Chief Solutions Officer with Analyticus. We are a AI company that focuses on solving problems primarily in the higher ed sector around retention and progression, student integrity, and we've, as Eric said, we're striking up what we believe is going to be a great partnership with Erkand. So looking forward to talking to you all today.
Great. So let's go ahead and jump right in. If you wouldn't mind, please go ahead and on the course page, you should have seen a WooClap poll. So there's 3 questions that we'd like you to answer that we're going to refer back to during the session. So if you get a chance, please go ahead and just complete those 3 questions for us, just to set kind of a benchmark of what we're actually going to cover, but as far as also being able to address kind of the competencies around A, originality, B, kind of contract cheating, and see kind of where we're going with authenticity.
And Eric,
yes,
they actually can't answer the questions until you display them.
Got it. So we'll go ahead then. Apologize for that.
Yep.
We're going to go ahead then and get that started. So what the first one is, what do plagiarism prevention and text similarity detections tools actually detect? So if you wouldn't mind quickly going ahead.
And if you need to access it, the URL is at the top of the screen there, if you didn't follow the link from the Moodle course.
The second one was, what percentage of students, undergraduate and graduate, admit to cheating on written assignments? And I always like to throw out the hint as well as full disclosure. The sample was collected from fall of 2002 to spring of 2015. And the sample size was quite large at 17. And then the last one, kind of, what is the average percentage breakdown of match content within a student's paper? So anytime you submit to a plagiarism prevention tool, what is that actual breakdown of internet matches, scholarly journals and academic publications, and student material? So we're going to go ahead and, while that's open, just give you a quick rundown of what we're going to spend. I'd like to spend about 40 minutes kind of really talking about, this isn't a sales pitch, first and foremost. I should have made the caveat, not a sales pitch. This is really trying to educate the higher education, the secondary, as well as the governmental arenas as far as what are student behaviors. And I also want to make sure that we know that this is not just going to be the plagiarism police or ethics police for this conversation. This is meant to be a collaboration and invoke dialogue around these specific items. So what we're going to do is give you an introduction to Erkand, kind of why we're having this conversation, the company lineage and history, spend the majority of the time in identifying kind of what is plagiarism prevention and text similarity detection. Phil's going to talk about what is ghostwriting. I know during an intro this morning, somebody had never heard the word contract cheating. So being able to kind of define what that is, and then spending some time looking within Moodle and how to enable kind of plagiarism prevention tools. How do you actually interpret a plagiarism prevention report? Are there ways for students to manipulate it? Are there ways to trick a plagiarism prevention tool? And then I think the majority of the interest, it sounds like, is around this authorship authenticity and how we're incorporating artificial intelligence to be able to really analyze student work. And so our goal is to be able to provide instructors and faculty, teachers, with the ability to actually have tools to be able to say, I know I've read 3 papers of a student's over a 5-week time frame, and I know the student's first artifact was definitely their written work. In artifact 2 or written assignment 2 and 3, we can clearly tell that there's not been, the student didn't write this, someone else wrote it. And so instead of having that he said, she said type of engagement, what we want to be able to do is to provide tools to point back to quantitative rationale and reasoning and analysis that actually will show what we're actually talking about with regards to the authorship authenticity. So Erkin, our goal here is just to provide the most optimized and cost-effective originality and authorship authenticity tool that seamlessly integrates within an institution's learning management system. So we are LMS agnostic. We have a very good deep integration, which is LTI, as well as a kind of utilizing our APIs for the Moodle integration. And so we really want to think about this as just an academic integrity tool. We don't want to provide grading. We don't want to provide feedback. It's just supporting your academic integrity initiatives. So the company's been around 20 years. So 20 years as of September. We just launched our North American operations in October of last year. So relatively new. Rationale behind that, Turnitin certainly is the market leader with 75% in the US, probably north of that in Canada. So it really kind of pick your battles, right? So we are the market leader in the Nordics, Europe, and recently in India. So last year in July of 19, we were awarded from the Ministry of Education a contract to be able to actually provide research integrity tools for all their graduate and PhD programs. So that's 1,067 institutions, roughly 1.3 million students. So they are by far our largest single client. About 5,700 customers, 83 countries. I also like to talk a little bit about kind of the technology, because I think it's really important in a partnership to establish the brand, to establish the credibility. We have to be able to provide scalability as well as reliability in this partnership. So to give you an idea, in 2018, we were acquired by Procuritas, which is a Scandinavian equity or a Scandinavian private equity fund. Our first investment was into the platform. So go ahead, rewrite the code, scale up for this new growth that we're actually investing in. So our uptime statistics in 2019 was 99.9%. I would invite you to go to status.erkin.com to see this year's uptime statistics. Believe it or not, it's north of the 99.9. I believe it's 99.96%. And that is with 150% increase in papers given COVID in April, May, and June. Average response time. Student submits a paper. The average response time in getting that originality report back for a 10-page paper, approximately 1 to 3 minutes. So it's going to be pretty instantaneously that the student's going to submit, get that originality report back. And then we're extremely excited for this collaboration with Analyticus that is just being kind of solidified last month to really support that academic integrity and quality initiatives through that advanced analytics. So let's go ahead and jump back to our moot point, our moot clap. And let's see, results here. So, let's see, Jeff, would you mind, my answers are going to be, let's see.
Yeah, it should be over on the left, is it not? You should be able to click that.
The results?
Yep.
So it looks like we have 3 answers, is that correct? So 50%, 8, and 10. So what percentage of students admit they've cheated on our written assignments? So to give you an idea, first of all, I want to kind of set the stage of what is plagiarism. So it's to steal or pass off the ideas or words of others, essentially without crediting the source or with citation or attribution. This is actually known as the McCabe study. It's also been completed by the International Center for Academic Integrity. So Dr. McCabe started this study in 2002 and essentially was sending out surveys to ask students essentially 3 quick questions. Asking them if they cheated on a test, and these could actually be anonymized, so there's no unique identifier to the actual survey. Percent of admitted cheating on written assignments, and then kind of clumping it together, saying total of admitting of written or testing. And so it really didn't matter on the breakdown of the undergrad versus graduate. So the initial hypothesis, it would be a little bit more high stakes in graduate school. So you would see a less percentage on actual potential cheating. So what it was cheating on tests, 17%, cheating on written assignments, 40%. And that was across the board. So 50% certainly is the closest to that metric that has been realized since 2002 and 2015. The one thing I also want to say about plagiarism before we jump over to contract cheating, the contract cheating question, is essentially plagiarism prevention tools. You notice that I don't say plagiarism detection tools. So I think there's a huge misnomer in the market as well as to the individual consumer. Consumer could be the institution, the school, the instructor, or the student. That plagiarism prevention tools actually detect plagiarism. So I'm here to set the record straight that no plagiarism prevention tool actually detects plagiarism. What we are actually exposing are where there's matched content. Content takes various forms, which we'll talk about in a couple slides. But I think it's important to be able to state what actual plagiarism prevention tools actually are able to actually detect. So Phil, I'll throw it over to you to talk a little bit kind of about a definition of contract cheating and ghostwriting, and kind of the chart here from the data set from Dr. Carmichael.
Thanks, Eric. So contract cheating is a very interesting form of academic dishonesty, and it's become more prevalent in the recent years. It was first discussed in the literature as far back as 2003. And it's whenever students are paying someone to do their work for them, and we see or obtaining the work without pay from another source, whatever the case may be. And we're seeing a large proliferation of this today, in which we're seeing auction sites, essay banks, just any number of things in which students are able to pay to have a paper completed by someone else. And there's also other cases of it too, whenever we think about essay banks. And this was very common back whenever I was in school or in college, in a whole nother form before there was an internet, that a lot of the fraternities and sororities would keep examples of papers that had existed or been submitted in classes previously, and then those were shared among the students, recycled, pieces of them taken and inserted into new papers. So all these things, be it a professional writer or services through a organization that the student may belong to, or just on things, sites that we might find, such as Course Hero and some others, in which they can take materials and submit them as their own, and in some ways avoid the plagiarism tools, because it's original work, but yet it's not work that the student completed. And as Eric said earlier, teachers intuitively know this. We know whenever we get something that a student hasn't written themselves, but it's been very difficult to be able to prove it until now. So at the end, I will walk you through a solution that we've developed that hopefully will allow the detection of contract cheating to be exposed and to allow for remedies to that situation. So, Eric, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did submit, attach the actual study, the Carmichael and Weiss study that was presented at the ICAI meeting in Portland earlier this year. So, you know, in data mining those 637 contract cheating sites, here is what you actually see as far as those classifications. You can't make this stuff up. The very last 14th label is actually plagiarism prevention tools. So, as far as kind of what is the process that we're actually providing here. So, you know, we talk about what we're detecting. Phil talks about what we're actually trying to analyze on the back end from kind of written work to written work. But what I want to do is, if you're not familiar with the plagiarism prevention tool, I want to kind of just walk you through kind of the technology and the workflow that both is happening on the back end and as well for the instructor. So the student is submitting through Moodle. So the workflow is going to be exactly as you're currently using for any type of paper submission. And also, I'm going to stop here and say, it's not just papers or assignments. There also are the abilities to do forums as well as workshops within Moodle. So we really are trying to provide as much originality capabilities or checking components for every submission that actually a student is actually providing. So the student submits the text or the discussion or through the workshop. That then kind of where the heavy analysis works, or the heavy lifting on the analysis actually works. So we're going to go out, we're going to take that content, whether it's a discussion post, a workshop, or an actual artifact or inline text. We're going to match against the internet, scholarly journals and academic publications, and student materials. So once we match that, then here's where kind of our secret sauce kicks in. And we actually are going to do the technology and the algorithm is going to look very different than most plagiarism prevention tools. So most plagiarism prevention tools, they just expose the text. And what I mean by that is, if I have written page 7 down on my document, page 7 is going to match somebody else's page 7, and it's going to match. If my name's Thomas Smith, I guarantee you there's millions of Thomas Smiths. That name Thomas Smith is going to match. So there's a lot of noise, if you will, in matching actual text. So the way Erkin does is just a little different. So we do that direct match, but then the secondary type of filter that we're going to do is we're going to remove that page 7. We're going to remove specific known words. We have the ability to whitelist if you have a template or if you have a form that you use for your assignments. We can remove that match. And then the tertiary match analysis that we're going to do is within that assignment. If I'm writing a paper on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, I have the ability within that assignment, it starts learning that we can remove that because it's not a concern for plagiarism. It's a known entity amongst that kind of group of students submitting the assignment. So think about what we're doing is essentially removing the false positives or reducing those false positives. And then at the very end, upon the expiration of the due date, then what happens is the last match that we do is anti-collusion. So we look within that class. So if there's 30 students, we're going to check against internet, scholarly journals, and academic publications, student materials. We're going to filter out the first, second, and third analysis. And then the last component is going to be able to do that anti-collusion check to check against students, all those students within the class. It doesn't make sense for us to do that in the upfront. So if a student submits the exact same paper as student 2, it's not going to catch it until after the actual expiration, because students will change the actual content. The content within the assignment will change. And so that's where the anti-collusion is actually initiated. The last thing then is this is where we are going to have that authorship authenticity. Because if you think about it, what we want to do is take the final version and be able to compare that against the previous versions that the student have submitted. And so Phil will talk about that. What are the metrics that we're looking at? What are the personality types that actually get at that analysis that make us, confident that we can then predict the results or authenticity of that student's paper. And then the output is certainly the result. So this is where the student, instructor, I'm going to say stakeholder or user, actually is exposed to the first time with Irkand. So on the technology and data privacy, before we jump into the majority of the conversation around originality, around manipulation, around student behaviors and authorship authenticity, we are built on a modern tech stack as of 2018, cloud hosted here in the US as well as in our European partners. Our goal is to provide accessible learning environments for all users. So the two leadership roles, think of it as thought leadership that we want to play is really in accessibility and data privacy. So our most recent VPAT and audit was for Section 508 compliance was WCAG 2.1 AA compliance. If you're not familiar with accessibility, I would say the standard for EdTechs is WCAG 2.0 or 2.1A compliance. So again, we want to be thought leaders in providing that accessible learning environment for all users. And this is what I'm most proud about. And I think Irkand actually stands as a thought leader with regards to data privacy. So even though we've brought Irkand over to North America, we are still adhering to the GDPR compliance that our European counterparts are actually have built.
Is everybody else here or just not Eric?
What does that mean? We do not claim ownership of your data. You own if students do not want to submit to the actual Irkand repository, you have the global repository. You have, as the institution, the ability not to submit to the global repository. If you as the institution has decided you want to submit to the global repository, we still provide the student with the ability to remove that actual artifact from the database. And this is where we want to take their IP and make sure that they're familiar with the privacy laws that they actually have. Before we jump to content sources, I'm going to go back over to my WooClap results. So it looks like what we're looking at is what is the average percentage breakdown. It looks like this might be 51% internet. I'm not sure how this was, Jeff, if you're familiar, how this was actually calculated. If these are percentages, it might be actual. If we knew 10 people took this, it might be a little hard to find this.
Yeah, it's unfortunately summing it all instead of giving you the average.
Okay, so I guess
7 people took it.
Got it. So what we'll say is the majority is the internet. So I would say, yes, you're correct. So during my time at Turnitin, roughly in 2009, roughly 50% of all student submissions were matched in the content. So today in 2020, roughly 70% of all matches, and the match that I'm actually talking about, or the sample size, is essentially for higher education institutions in the 100, 200, 300, 400 level classes. So 70% match to the internet, roughly 10 to 15% scholarly journals and academic publications, and 10 to 15% student submissions. I'll also then get a little more granular on the student submission side and say this is actually half of the student submissions, so 5 to 7.5% is collusion within the classroom or collusion within your institution. So clearly we still have a collusion issue, but for the most part, the majority of the matches come from the internet. Any questions about that before we jump right into the actual demo and some interesting sources of where students are citing their content? Great, feel free to interrupt at any time. So what I wanted to also do before we jump in is into the demo is talk a little bit about, I know Phil mentioned contract cheating. So I'm going to throw out that some and most students come and actually, let's say they're looking for paper citation help. They Google paper citation help. EasyBib is a great application to help do to help complete their citations. But you can see about after the 12th or 13th specific assistance or truly helping the student, what you start to see is immediately you're starting to see, oh yeah, we can help you. Come here and you get 50% off your first order for $125 for us to write the paper. So I'm going to almost call this predatory lending style. You actually have the ability to come in here and from click 10 or 11 with, or I'm sorry, entry 10 or 11, you are being presented with ways to actually purchase purchase or procure a specific tool. So this is something that's it's concerning. So do you have the conversation up front with your student? Absolutely. This is a conversation I think we all need to have, not only just in secondary, but higher education. And as you can see, still into the graduate level. So what do plagiarism prevention tools actually are? What are they able to detect? Well, a tool like Irken can actually detect synonyms, paraphrasing, as I talked about, manipulation of text. Here is a prime example of how students, and again, what I'm communicating to you is through focus groups and through the research of how students are, quote, gaming the system. So here they would come to a specific free tool, paraphrasing tool, again, technology not great, be able to enter in text, then they're able to actually see the paraphrased text immediately coming in here, typically going Control C, Control V back into their paper. So Irken is able to actually detect paraphrasing and synonyms, which I will show in the demo. The other tool so collaboration sites. Phil mentioned West Virginia, so we're gonna pull up University of West Virginia. So if you're not familiar with a tool called Course Hero started off extremely well with all good intentions as a test prep and kind of a lecture note sharing community. These are my words, not Irken's, not anyone else. I believe that we're into this sharing economy where collaborations kind of went out the window, and now we're seeing it used more or less for collaboration. Think of this as essays, homework. It's the Napster of sharing in academia. So if I looked here at the University of West Virginia, and I would highly recommend any of you to go and actually check. If you're instructors, my guess is your work is already here. Did I spell it wrong? West Virginia. There's high schools, there's colleges, universities. What you are looking at are specific items that have been shared by students. So here, if I look at accounting, and these are only public documents. So if you log in, you're able to see a ton more. So here, this is from Professor Lynch. Research essay right here. We have the capabilities, and I actually am getting blocked. So you can actually click on this, it's an image. We would be able to extract that image, the text from there, and incorporate that into the tool. So what we're not able to actually log in and go behind the paywall and crawl their content, but anything that's public facing, we are constantly updating within the system. Typically what a student will do, they'll sign up, they'll deposit or submit some of their prior work, maybe their homework from this semester in their Econ 101 course. What they see is then they receive credits for future use of for other courses. So if you're taking a Psych 101 course, then what I would do here is I would go to my Psych 101 course and actually look at what the research are, look at the essays, look at the homework, etc. So you're able to actually see across all of higher education, across all secondary schools. So something just to know that this is concerning. I also mentioned then how to trick, I put in how to trick plagiarism checkers. It's very well known how to do this. If you go to Google, there's hundreds upon hundreds of ways to actually trick and avoid specific plagiarism detection or plagiarism prevention tools. Take a look at it. I'm going to show this in the demo. With that said, then let's talk a little bit within Moodle how actual tools like Irken can be incorporated to really prevent these types of issues. And again, I don't want to point the finger and say that we're constantly the plagiarism police and having a stick all the time. There are incentives that we are going to provide, and this can be used as a teaching and learning tool by seeing within the report, how is it cited? So being able to pull up brackets, quotes. I'll show this later, but just as a background, students are taking advantage of the system. So just trying to find efficient ways to be able to expose this. So if we go into my Econ 101 course, I mentioned that there are assignments and discussions, so I've enabled this. The handshake that it takes to integrate Irkand within Moodle, approximately about 2 to 3 minutes. It's a shared key, a specific password, and then you're in, and the integration has been established. So I'm in as an instructor. I'm going to go in and edit my settings here for my assignment. It's my econ assignment. This should look very similar to you. Where you're going to see Irkand is down within the account settings. So here, do we want to enable Irkand, the plagiarism prevention tool, for this assignment? Yes. Then this second decision we have to make, do we want to use this in a formative setting or a summative? What I mean by that is, do we want to show the student the originality report as well as the similarity report? Our best practice is say yes. Encourage students to actually come in and actually see the reports, be able to actually kind of have that buffer that if I did plagiarize, I know it, I go back in and rewrite this. If I miscited, I could go back in and properly cite the actual citations. So we believe that it should be always. Also, if you've created this for a quiz, online text for a quiz, you can actually then say, no, I don't want to do this, and use this in the summative setting. So we're not going to show this. Or maybe we say, yes, we are going to show the originality report, but it's going to be after the due date. So after that due date expires, then they will be able to see the report. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of how that actual tool is enabled. Very easy to utilize. If we go back to the individual assignment then, what I want to do is I want to show you so I'm back to my measurement of elasticities assignment. Essentially, you go into the assignment, you view all the submissions, and you're now able to see the similarity report. So here you can see within that actual assignment, so 2 students, both Erics didn't do stellar, so one had 100% match, one had 96% match. And you notice this opt-out setting. So if you remember, I briefly talked about the GDPR compliance. You have the ability as the instructor as well as the student, if you've allowed the student to submit to the global repository, it is that student's IP. They have the ability to opt out of the originality report, or excuse me, we can opt out of the Irkand global repository. So I think that's important to note, because it's something that, again, it's their IP. It's still going to be within your institution's or school repository. You're just giving them the ability not to have somebody from the University of Finland or the University of Toronto, University of Missouri checking against their content. So if we wanted to view this report, I essentially am going to click on the analysis report. That is going to open my originality report. And this is the first time that the individual stakeholder, this time being the instructor, is actually engaged with the report. So what you're going to look at as far as within the landscape here is going to be a 5-page paper. How do I know that? There's 5 pages submitted on my dashboard. If there were 14, what you're going to see, 14 pages, you're going to see it truncated at 10 pages. The type of text that we're actually providing are the matches that we're actually providing. In orange, that's match text. In purple, this is going to be where there's manipulation or warnings that the student tried to trick the system. We'll show that. And then I also briefly mentioned early on this ability for the cross-language detection. So roughly about 5% of all of our match content is from a translation. So what do I mean by that? I'm a non-native English speaker. I speak French. I take a French research journal. I take that French research journal or French content, put it into Google Translate, immediately translate it to English, claim it as my own. You think you've tricked the system. What you'll see is, as long as that content has been crawled within our archives, it's going to have that cross-language translation. Again, the algorithm is looking at characters to words, words to overall languages. Another distinguishing factor from most plagiarism prevention tools, we actually attach the individual artifact to the originality report. Reason why we do this is from accreditation purposes, being able to take that artifact and associate it with this assessment of essentially originality. And then secondly, this gives you the ability to have an archived data security, a data recovery of all those artifacts. Also, if you decide that you don't like IRC in the future, after a year, 2 years, 3 years, something new comes along, you have the ability to take all of those papers and ingest those into your next plagiarism prevention tool. You own the data. Remember, we are GDPR compliant. So this document, there's nothing special about it. It essentially is just my 5-page Word document that I will refer back to briefly in a moment. Lastly then, so what is the similarity score? So for this paper, 79%. How does that compare to the rest of the class? And so what we're taking is a similarity score for this instructor. So here what you're able to see is for this instructor, the average score of all of their assignments is 66%, versus this student is 79%. So this is just a way to benchmark it. Ideally, it would be at the assignment level. Unfortunately, through Moodle, we're not able to get as granular as the assignment. We can only get as granular as the instructor. So what we're able to say then is, look at anything outside the average. So here's 79%. So there's a couple ways to view this content. As you get familiar with the UI, I could literally just come up here, click on the content, the match, be able to see a side-by-side comparison, decide if it's actually apparent that it's quote plagiarized, or the student just didn't cite it. Remember, we are only showing matched text. We're not exposing plagiarized text. But for the demo purposes, I'm going to go to the entire document. You can see here for the student, now this is both student and instructor, you could turn on quotes and brackets and use this again as a teaching and learning tool to be able to come in here and see exactly where the citations were. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to turn that off. The very first search, I'm going just to exclude that from the analysis because I took it all the way from Wikipedia. We'll exclude that. You can immediately see that 79% score went down to 29%. So it is actually showing exactly where in real time how the change in that similarity percentage actually does change. So as an instructor, we talked about, or as in a preface of showing paraphrasing, we talked about being able to show paraphrasing. Here's the submitted document on the left, the student submitted. Only 2 color coordination schemes you need is yellow and red. Yellow is actually paraphrasing. So the student changed the word. Red is removal of the word. So this is the word an, A-N. And then you have the ability to come in here and see the actual source. I'm going to skip that for now and for time's sake. As far as the purple, so being able to show where there's manipulation in the page. So again, characters to words, words to languages. We're analyzing individual characters. Diving with bubbles of carbon monoxide in the blood. So what you can see here is there are X's in between there. Most likely, you would never have seen that. So I'm using this, going back to my proof source of that student artifact. Here you can see what I did, and what the #1 way to trick a system is to come in here and put an X in between it. You can see that's a red X or a white X. So have the ability to put white X's so it looks like one long word. Student would not have submitted this in Word. They would have transferred this back to a PDF and then submitted it. You would not have known. So in the report, you can actually click on that and we will describe this. So you can see the white X's. This basically then is a disclaimer saying this is a way to trick the system. It's white space manipulation. It could be, I like how we say it could be perfectly acceptable, but also suggests that this is manipulation. Lastly, then put in Cyrillic characters. So those A's, I's, O's, and U's are actually Cyrillic characters. Put in some code in this one. So these are actually not words, it's code. And then this last one, something called a homoglyph to be able to show that's actually not a word. So we are showing where there's manipulation. The last thing before we switch it over to Phil on the actual authorship authenticity of where that's coming this fall, being able to show you the sources. So here you can see that here are the sources. I did remove that, so it is still keeping the source, but it removed the similarity because I moved that to 0. And then here are the rest of the actual matches within the paper. If we missed a source, you have the ability. So if this was an econ paper and I pulled something from Stats Canada, I can put in the actual URL, hit send, and in 24 to 48 hours, our crawlers will have that ingested, indexed and archived into our system. The last thing, if you have your own lecture notes, if you have your own quizzes, if you have your own notes, handouts, send that directly, our crawlers, to them if students are going to be utilizing them. We truly want to make this the most optimized matching technology for you. So I'm going to stop there. The I'm sorry, I failed to mention the cross-language detection. So if there are any exposures of cross-language detection, we will expose this. So what we're going to show is the submitted document. So since this is an English written document, you see English on the left, Dutch on the right. I actually did include some additional French, as well as then Spanish as well. So we are going to show you word for word where the actual matches occurred. So I'm going to stop here. So for the authorship authenticity, we are going to be including this directly below our cross language, and this will be exposed on the last submission. So Phil, I'm going to stop sharing and you can take over the navigation.
Thanks, Eric. So whenever we think about the issue of authenticity, it's important to note that Analyticus is a company that we focus on the application of artificial intelligence for a host of problems with inside of academia. And how we came up with the idea for looking at the authenticity matrix was that through our retention analyses, we're looking for methods of finding very unique characteristics among each student. So what you see here is a graph of a student's personality. Now, how do we derive this? We use natural language processing to look at the combination of syntax, sentence structure, phraseology, emotion, and some other measures that reside within all text. And then from that, we extract 30 different variables that you can see represented in this radar graph, and the weighting of each of those characteristics on a student-by-student basis. This particular extraction method has a 99.9% model accuracy with respect to being able to mine out the characteristics on a per-student basis, and the consistency between written items, likewise, regardless of how far they're separated in time, is also at the 99.9% threshold. So by taking this, we develop a unique fingerprint for each student that, like I said previously, we'd used it to help us predict retention. But whenever we discovered how accurate this was, we thought, okay, we can take this and then from a known sample of the student's work, and notably, it doesn't have to be from a paper. We can extract shorter pieces of text from emails, discussion boards, whatever the source may be, and develop a profile of each student, and then predicated upon that, for any subsequent work that is turned in, we can develop a match to show how probable it is that this work was completed by someone else. So in this dashboard that you see, this would be for all students within a particular, in this case, it's within a particular program, and the index runs from 0 to 100. We set the threshold where the university feels it's appropriate, and most cases that's about a 70% threshold. Anything under 70%, it's highlighted as being highly suspect, such as you see with this particular student, and you see the values and facets for this student, and then the values and traits that were displayed in the paper, resulting in a index of 0.4, which shows that there's only a 40% chance basically that this is a student's work. So it's highly improbable that this particular student wrote this piece that is being analyzed. And we can do a deeper dive down to the student level to take a look at exactly what's going on, looking again at their index, looking at where they fall within this, getting a micro analysis of their personality, and then detailed information if we want to on the student analysis. We can also come up and look at this from a strategic perspective that administrators might want to look at information across weeks within a course to understand how trends are occurring with respect to potential contract cheating on a holistic basis inside of the university, and looking at those distributions, as well as, and I just got out of this, okay, as well as coming in here again at the faculty level and looking across weeks by any individual faculty member where they can see what's going on in different periods. And for instance, here we have a spike in students overall submitting papers that were suspect. So it allows you to look at it from the individual student level, and it's also plotted as a graph to where you can visualize what's going on. So through this, we have a very powerful means of understanding if the work indeed is the students or that there's a high degree of likelihood that they have outsourced this and had another entity develop it for them. So that
hey,
in 5 minutes. Yes.
Hey, Phil, real quick, there was a question about looking at the student writing within one course or across the institution. I'm assuming that's institution.
Institution. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what topic it is. It doesn't matter what course it's in. It doesn't matter if it was a sample taken 4 years apart from the time a student was a freshman to a senior. In fact, I've taken my own samples of writing that are like 30 years old and compared them to work I've done now, and the personality still comes out almost exactly the same, to within like one half of 1% of variance across a 30-year period is what we noticed. Your personality, regardless of changes in your vocabulary, phraseology, or other writing skills, still remains constant throughout your lifetime.
And it looks like Jeanette had her hand up. I don't know if she had a question.
I do have a question. Thank you. I'm going to try to be articulate here. This seems like, I mean, this is great. And certainly I don't want, I'm the chair of the history department here at Carroll. So that's just, you know, maybe useful to know. I don't want my students cheating, right? And I want them to do their own work. But now we're tracing their personality. I mean, I'm beginning to feel a little bit like Foucault's panopticon, right? This is a lot of surveillance. And I'm just wondering at what point, where does this intersect the expectation that students don't cheat? So instead of being the sort of constantly kind of surveilling them and they're tracking their personality and all of these things, how do we balance this with the idea that have some integrity that doesn't require me to do this to you? Do you understand my question?
Absolutely. I completely get where you're coming from. And there is really no easy answer to that question. I mean, unfortunately, we live in a society where this is very prevalent. And, you know, it's not always a case of the student perhaps outsourcing their work. Sometimes you can get instances where they've borrowed certain phrases or certain pieces of material that are not caught in the plagiarism detection that are surfaced by this type of analysis. But I still understand where you're coming from, because yes, it is building a very high degree of surveillance, but at the same time, I don't really see how it can be prevented. I mean, I was faculty too. I was faculty for 8 years. I taught at WVU, UNC, and I get where you're coming from, but think about cases where you have read a student's paper yourself and you just know that that student didn't write that, and you want to say something, but there's no way that you could ever prove what you knew intuitively to be true. And that's a dilemma that people come up against constantly. So I guess there's no easy answer to what you're asking.
But thanks for taking a stab at it. I appreciate that. And we live in the world as it is, not as we would like it to be.
Yeah, and you know, Jeanette, the one thing that I would say, just from you already know when you're reading that student's paper without the analysis, when it's that different, that the delta is that different, you already are having that conversation with them. I think for us, it's just how can we actually expose and make it more defined or precise, right? I think that's what we're looking at from an efficiency standpoint.
Great, thank you both.
And there's also another side to the coin too, in that with what Eric showed you before, there are definitely some things that could be suspect, but not conclusive, certainly, that the student had engaged in plagiarism. But if you have this metric on top of it, it helps reinforce that finding. It helps reinforce that finding and gives you more confidence in addressing the student, especially with as litigious as our society has become.
Sure, makes sense. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And Phil, from an implementation side, one of the questions that was brought up is, would you only use these tools in major, the authenticity in major assignments? It says these tools, and I'm going to take the originality side of things. I would say from a best practice, if you look at what ICAI and some of the academic integrity councils would actually recommend, if you're going to have an academic integrity policy, our recommendation and their recommendation would be to send everything through. Therefore, there's no bias. There's no opportunity for the student to say, well, I was able to do it this way, but over here now you're saying it's an issue. So on the academic integrity side, we would recommend sending everything through. Phil, what would your response be on the with regards to the authorship authenticity?
I would agree too, with the exception that, as you said earlier, Eric, we would not recommend sending first, second, or subsequent drafts through, but only the final version of papers be subjected to the integrity analysis. And for the same reasons that you cited.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for the interesting presentation, Eric and Phil. We're actually at the end of time, but we can stay a little longer if they would like to stay and entertain more questions. I want to remind everyone, please fill out the survey for this presentation. It helps both the presenters and the moot organizers. And if you do need to get your OPI credits, remember to fill out your digest. Thank you.
And if there's any other questions, I'm happy to stay around a few more minutes longer. If not, certainly thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. It's an interesting time that we are as we move to remote and online learning. So we're hopeful that we can support you in your academic integrity initiatives.
And it looks like we're done.
Okay.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
Jeff, thank you very much for the moderation. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Jeff.
Uh-huh.